Hello, everybody. Dr. Red Ruby Scarlet here with you. And to illustrate some of the wonderful things that we've been looking at in using the approved learning frameworks in family daycare, I have the magnificent Val here for an interview. And Val is from her beautifully named Val's Family Daycare. Val, I want to ask you about yourself, but first let's just do an acknowledgement of country. So as I had said at the outset, I'm here on beautiful Gadigal country. So Val, where are you? Tell us, what country are you on today?
I'm in Gyra on Banbi country,
Mm-hmm.
and we say Ginagay, which is hello in Banbi. It's Banbi is the clan of the
Gumbanya?
Gumbaynggirr. That's it.
Folk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like yeah. So that's where we're at.
Beautiful. And Val, how far away from so Gadigal country slash Marrickville, how far away are we from each other in this minute?
As in travel time, about 6 hours
So
driving.
we're
Yeah.
quite a way away. So give us a bit about Val's Family Daycare. Delight us with your beautiful place.
Oh wow. I guess the crux of my program is pretty much outside. We spend a lot of time outside. We just love it out there because the children can lead their own learning. There's so many different spaces. There's just they're just so capable out there, and I think they just play and learn so differently in the outdoor environment.
I think also too the idea of being outside in the past has kind of been thought of as, oh, well, while we're setting up inside, we'll just chuck everybody outside. And what I love about the chats we've had in preparation for this and seeing your beautiful work is that you're kind of actually going, no, I'm centering that as the nucleus of learning, the middle of learning, and a starting place and a rich place and a place you spend a lot of time. And I quite love that we're able to give these different perspectives on those experiences. So
Years ago, I remember the one what someone once said, that outdoor program used to be like secondary to the indoor. You'd plan for indoor, and the outdoor was just, we'll just go and ride the bikes. Yeah.
So Val, before we dive into the lusciousness of your beautiful outdoor wonderland, can
Mhm.
you just give us a bit? We want to know about you. So obviously your background, but particularly how long you've been working with the approved learning framework. So you're working explicitly with the early years learning framework.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long have you been working with that, and a bit about yourself?
Well, I've started family daycare almost 20 years ago. 20 years in July it will be. Wow, have to have a celebration. And so in that time, I started doing my certificate 3, and then I did my diploma, and then it was just too good. So with some encouragement from my TAFE teacher, I went on and did my bachelor. And yeah, so I guess, look, I can't tell you exactly when, but when the first early years learning framework came out, I started to dabble then because I didn't really understand what it was about. And it was just, I guess, over time, then, the more you read it and the more you get encouraged. And then we kind of had to start using it. And then I thought, I better get in and read this and see what it's all about. And it's just so good. It just led me so many different places. I just really enjoyed it and enjoy the whole thing.
Well, as a person who was part of writing the first one, that's very reassuring. But also, Val, something that you said that I hope other family daycare people out there who are listening, or anybody, is that when you said, oh, I'm not really sure about this. And I think that being honest of, I'm actually not quite sure what to do with it is a really a strength in essence.
Mm,
Because
yeah.
sometimes you think, oh, we've got to get it right. We've got to know everything. And sometimes that puts pressure on us. And then it might stifle our learning because we feel like we've got to know everything and know how to do it up front. But that's, just that small statement that you said and that beautiful honesty says, here's something I've got to learn. And I've got, a whole lot of people to get to learn that with. And so I find that really encouraging as well. And, I was teaching at the time when the EYLF, the first EYLF was released. And it was, the photographs were from the centre in which I was teaching. And, we were very lucky to have a bit of a go at it. But even then, being on the inside of developing it, I still had to go, oh, how would I do this in practice? And I
Yeah. Yeah.
love that that is actually part of how we build our professional relationships. Do you get me?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's kind of part of our page 13 of different perspectives, our page 18 of engaging in different ways of working and thinking and reflecting and critical reflecting. And it's almost like this conversation is an example of how to do that.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Actually, I was just thinking you were talking about page numbers, and I think, oh no, my favorite page number is 22 in the new one because it's the play-based learning.
Hold please, caller. That's line 22 and why it's not page 13. Hang on.
No, page 20. Well, page 21, 22 is my favorite because it outlines everything I like to do.
Play-based learning and intentionality, a new
Yeah.
principle.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the rest of it.
Yeah, because it gives you so many ideas, doesn't it?
Do you know what would be fun? Everybody watching, tell us your favorite page. And if you don't have a favorite page, jump into the table of contents, which we've talked about, and have a look and see if there are some words there that really appeal to you. Wouldn't it be fun if we all did actually have a favorite page?
Yeah. Make that your mission. Get a favorite page.
Favorite page. I love that. So we will dive into that in a sec. So Val, you've got this beautiful photo essay that you've put together. And the question that I've got framing it is, what are some of the ways that you approach putting the EYLF into practice? Yeah. So I'm going to put this on screen for you to delight us with. And can I tell you, having looked through this, it's pretty delicious. So let me get this up and going. There we go. Outdoor learning. Make us wild with envy, Val. Tell us some stories.
Well, I just took these photos because they look like, the children are just doing their thing, but look what's happening, just the immersion in the environment and how they're exploring on their own.
And I mean, as somebody who doesn't know the children and doesn't know the context, but has dived to the EYLF a little bit, and obviously we value our beautiful certificate 3s and diplomas and all the other education that we get to have, which makes our profession so important that we are all qualified, is that I can look at that photo of the baby on the grass and think, oh, I'm so glad Val's out there with the baby on the grass taking that photo. But I can immediately read some things into that about the way that the baby's moving their body, about the interest or the curiosity that the baby or infant is demonstrating. That person probably has a name. The engagement, the intensity, the little bottom is off the ground, leaning right into that blade of grass to be curious about it. And then you can talk about fine motor skills. You can talk about the gross motor, the balance. Like there's so much just to pull out of that. I didn't even see that happen, but your photograph, it's such a great pedagogical photograph because it's really offering some insights into a curiosity that infant is showing in your context.
And he'd get a handful too, and then he'd sit back and he'd just carefully look at what was in his hand, and then he'd just drop it, and then he'd go for some more. It was just really great to watch.
And such a moment of valuing that, I mean, watching grass grow, some people might find very boring like myself, but actually watching grass grow is a fascinating outdoor experience. And even that idea of being, when you say that, holding the grass in your hand and looking at it and being curious about it, sometimes it's easy to think that those everyday things aren't valuable, but they are, because they've struck an interest, they've grabbed that child's attention, and there's an opportunity to be wondering and thinking and then engaging. You get to ask them a question about it. You get to engage in, what page 13 and page 18, my favorites, and probably page 21, 22, now that I think about it, the intentionality of engaging. Val, so you're teaching me as we go. And, those kinds of things, I think, are things that we're busy trying to think, we've got to create this program and have all these things and do all this stuff and have a goal and have an aim. Whereas we can actually just observe something like this and find the richness within it.
That's right.
Beautiful. The other one that struck me particularly, I mean, they're all fabulous. I like the reaching and the stacking of those recycled, upcycled, cycle.
Some of our favourite outdoor things. They are chairs, they are wheels, they are towers. They're just the best. We have different sizes, different. Yeah. Yeah,
I
it was
love the
good.
stretching up and being on the tippy toes.
Yes, yes,
Mm. And is that your sandpit in the background we see
it
there?
is. It is. Yeah.
So interesting, Val. Would it be commonplace, or would it be one option that people might look and go, well, there's not very much stuff in your sandpit. What's going on there?
I don't tend to encourage play in any specific way. Like I'll give shovels and I'll give buckets because, that's great fine motor and physical development as well. But sometimes I think just providing the materials such as, blocks of wood and the spools and pine cones and rocks and shells and pots and pans and just leave them. The other day, this same little guy, the same little guy that's stacking the towers, he called me over and he said, Val, I drew a picture of you. And I'm thinking, what did he use to draw? And I came over, he'd used his stick to draw a picture of me in the sand. And that was just so heartwarming. And I thought, oh, that's so great. And of course, we led on to sort of talk about, the cultural, the way the Indigenous would do the same. And that was, a really open-ended learning experience as well. But you just never know what's going to happen.
Mm. It's almost like that would be your logo, isn't it? That looks like a sand drawing.
I guess so, yeah.
And I love the way that you're thinking through what other perspectives could be entailed and twinkled into that moment. What are the many ways of looking at it, that the child's got a stick and drawn a picture in the sand because the opportunity was there. And so it kind of raises some really, really rich questions about planning. So do we have to have 50, 10, 100 things in the sandpit to plan for opportunity? What happens if we plan for surprise? And one of the words that I love the best in the EYLF, and I will get my phone out, not to text my best friend, but to do a little word search, is that the word curiosity is a really important, curiosity and creativity are really important words in learning. And I wonder sometimes if we put out too much stuff, or if we're working around the planning cycle and we're trying to respond to something that we've seen for children and we put all this stuff out, are we prompting curiosity and questions, or are we saying to them, do this? And what I'm sensing is, from looking at your places and spaces, is there's a lot there that says, there's a lot in your environment that says ask a question and be curious and creative. And just to bring it back to the EYLF, on page 4, not in the top 10, but definitely has one of the top 10 quotes. And that is that there are 2 goals in the ALFs, both of them. And the second goal is this, that all young Australians become confident and creative individuals. So when I look at those photographs, I can see the national goal at work in those processes. Talk us through these beautiful, beautiful pedagogical artifacts.
The little guy down on the bottom right with the 2 buckets of water, that was fun. He was just sprinkling sand in over and over and over again, and then reaching in, grabbing the wet sand and then dripping it back out again. And then I've got some smaller spaces like the cubby, and I've got a cozy corner as well, which sort of allows for small group play or individual play. The cubby house that you can see it down the bottom, it's got holes in the back so that if a child does want to go in there by themselves, they can still see and still feel part of everything, but still having that solitary play. And then
Sorry, before you go on, Val, what I'm hearing as you're talking is that these little places and spaces have been really thoughtfully planned. So planning isn't all, I mean, it can be, but it's not always, let's put that puzzle on the table. Planning is, I'm going to create this space. It's visible. I'm going to have these 2 ways you can enter so that you can participate by being in there, or you can participate by watching what's going on. So there's a lot of thoughtfulness, intentionality, page 22, Val.
Yes.
Intentionality in literally how you're setting up the physical places and spaces. So we don't have to fill things up with lots of activities and experiences. And so what I'm hearing as you're talking is, I'm just looking at page 23. We might have to get that on our favourites list, Val, which is actually learning environments.
Oh, yes. That's another close favourite. I do like that one as well.
Yeah, it's up there in your top 10. but that also directly relates to the national quality standard, because of course we know that quality area 3 is all about the physical environment. So,
Yes.
just as you're talking, you're telling these beautiful stories that are so inclusive, everyone can understand them. But you can also see how they're strongly connected to the early years learning framework and the practices and the principles that sit really, really neatly and tidily into the national quality standard. So it's almost like they're not just beautiful photographs, they're beautiful photographs that are demonstrating how you're putting the ALFs, the EYLF into practice, and then how that practice sits really beautifully within the national quality standard. So I guess for me, I've been around for a long time too, but I find this really reassuring, because I think, yes, I don't have to fill my classroom up, because of course I'll be inside, Val, not outside with you. I don't have to fill my classroom with stuff. I can create beautiful places and spaces that offer opportunities, that ask questions, that are open-ended. And it's like, I know the theory is called loose parts, and people use the term, I like to use the term intelligent materials.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just because, and I mean, it comes out of, some of the thinking that some people have done in other approaches around the world. Reggio Emilia is one of them. But the way that idea of materials being intelligent, then we can be in conversation with them. And those gorgeous children rolling on that thingy there, that's a different way to participate with something that would normally say, well, crawl through me, or stand next to me, or whatever. So I
That's
love the
right.
way that the children's curiosity, or what you're noticing as well, is actually driving the way that they're using those materials. And there's that exchange between them, that what do you call it? Is it like a tunnel?
It's a tunnel, yeah.
And look
Yeah.
how it's making those child use their bodies and
Absolutely. And they
for
slid
a
down the other
scale.
side. Yeah.
Yes, it's kind of shaping the way that the children are moving. So that relationship between the materials in the environment, the physical environment, and the fact that you're noticing that, I mean, that's kind of a little journey around the planning cycle, isn't it?
Mm.
Mm.
And what else have we got? This little guy in the tire, he got in and out, in and out, in and out. And then one of the other children came over with the hoop. And obviously, seeing that he was enjoying being inside the tire, then decided to put the hoop over the top. So that was a really interesting one, because I think he was just trying to find out his place in space, and he was just in and out, in and out. And then we've got the tree swing, that's a favorite, and the
Sorry, Val,
cupcake.
can I just make a little comment about the
Yeah.
tire and the hoop? What I
Yeah.
love about that is, in your story, it's like there's these 3 layers of noticing. So there's the child experimenting with their body in space. Then there's another child noticing that child doing that. And then
Yeah.
there's you noticing that child doing that. And so that level of detail, you don't have to have lots of things, and it doesn't have to be busy, just that slowing down and the watching of the watching of the watching. And I
Mm.
suppose that's a conversation that you could probably come back to. Remember that day that you were in the tire and I saw so and so, and they then brought the hoop over, and then I was
Yeah.
watching da 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 da. That's an example of how, you can take an observation, and then you can start to plan for how you might, take that experience somewhere else. Because revisiting is a form of planning in essence, isn't it? If we go back to the cycle of planning, the cycle of planning isn't about giving a question to answer. It's about being curious. And it's, we talk about in our book and in our courses is that the language that's used is ing, observing, their verbs, their doing words.
Mm.
How are we planning, and who are we planning with? And are we planning with the clay, and is the clay planning with us? So there's all those beautiful dimensions that I think, and I actually find it very freeing thinking about it in this way, because I remember, as a young, when I first finished my associate diploma moons ago, that thinking I've got to put an activity on the table, and then what, and how's that going to meet that individual child's needs, rather than going, well, what is that child doing, and how can I work individually with that child within this group? And
Mm.
that's what I'm hearing when I'm listening to you tell these stories about the way you work really closely with materials and physical spaces and places for children to question, inquire, investigate, explore, and all of those words are in the EYLF multiple times. And I also find that reassuring, because I think sometimes we think, oh, we've got to predict what children will do so that we can observe that they've got their fine motor and they can start writing their name or whatever, or they can do pincer grasp, or we feel under pressure to set things up to, which is more like a test, isn't it? And that's not really how the EYLF wants us to work. It wants us to put opportunities out so that we can learn with and alongside children in the surprises that they'll offer us.
Absolutely. So these are just some things I put together. I like to make things out of recycling, just to show the children that you don't have to go out and buy a toy.
And I guess with our new sustainability principle on page 17, it's such an important one, because it deals with, 3 parts of environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability. And it's like, just in your brief description of these beautiful places and spaces that's so inviting, it's like you've addressed those 3 parts of that sustainability, as a starting place. Because how do we do economic sustainability with children? It could sound a bit outrageous, but it is that thing around, look at these boxes and we're reusing this and it's done that, and it might have another life after this and another life and another life. Yeah, because I think sometimes we think our sustainability is, let's stick lids to a piece of cardboard and that becomes an activity. And whilst that might be fun, it then can't be reused for anything else.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So Val, just at this point, I want to reflect on a couple of the questions around, we're talking generally around practice and linking back here and there to our ALFs. What are some ways that you would make this visible, the ALFs visible in your every day, in your approaches, in your communications with families? What are some of the bits and pieces that you do to make it visible? I can see that it's visible, and I'm sure our beautiful viewers can see that it's visible within the places and spaces that you've set up, the thoughtfulness, the cycle of planning, thinking about children, following children, responding to children, looking at how children are working together. And we know that all of that is in the ALFs. How do you make that visible?
To everyone, pretty much. To the children, even to the children themselves, we talk about it.
Yeah.
We say things like, oh, you're using your body and, you're using your brain to think, and even things like, when you're feeling angry, your red brain's there and you can't think because your thinking brain's going to hide because your red brain's there. And we talk about things like that. So I guess talking with the children about their learning, I guess, is one way to make it visible. I talk to the families a lot. So, quite often, like, they're welcome to stay. We're outside in the afternoon when it's pickup time. They're welcome to stay and watch their children. And I'll just say, can you see what's happening over there? That's learning outcome 3, and they're looking after their bodies, and just something along those lines. I do have quite a few teachers as parents, so that it's quite a good topic of conversation between us all too. And then what else do I do? I guess a lot of it is on project books and emails and observations. That's basically, and then you'll put things around, and, if there's a picture, you'll just explain what the picture's about and to say, they're showing they're a confident learner, things like that.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you've got a range of different ways that you're communicating things. Sometimes you'll write that down. Sometimes it'll be in an email to somebody or to a group of people. Sometimes you'll talk about and be illustrating it in that moment. Sometimes you're putting it in your program book and you're reflecting on it, because I know you have a few different bits and pieces that you will be showing us. Yeah, and I think I love that, because it's such a reminder. I know I can get a bit stuck in my head thinking, oh, I've got to write that down. And did I say to that educator, did you write that down? And have I got a photo and da-da-da? And whilst the evidence that you're showing us here is absolutely gorgeous, sometimes it is the conversation that you've had is just as valuable. And it's how wonderful for a family or a parent to hear that's outcome 3. It might sound a bit weird in some sense, but in the other sense, how wonderful that they can go, Oh, I am so reassured. Val knows exactly what she's talking about. And she's illustrating to me that something that I might not see, because we know that play is so important to us, families might not see. You've got that really beautiful advocacy piece for the professional ways in which we're engaging and just really gently throwing it into a conversation with a family. So it's not like we've got to, I worry that people get very overburdened with, oh, it's got to be the outcome. We've got to put this, we've got to quote the outcome and quote the EYLF and, all of that stuff when it may not necessarily need to be that rigid or that intense. It can be that very gentle, yeah, or I'm not sure about that. Let me just have a little look and I'm going to see because I know I read something about relationships in here or communication. Here it is. It's in outcome 4 and 5. That thing where the EYLF is here to be our friend and to help us, help resource us to be able to have those conversations, not a test of do we know it and are we using it and we're quoting all the bits, because I worry that we put ourselves under quite a lot of pressure doing that kind of stuff.
I mean, the beauty of the EYLF is that it's so flexible. I mean, there's no right or wrong way. It's just whatever you can get from it, and every learning instance is unique. And so every learning instance isn't always going to fit into a certain category. It might be 2 or 3 different learning outcomes, and there's just no right or wrong, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my little story about the outcomes, which we've talked about, is that I think about them as incomes. So if they're an outcome, we might feel like we've got to attach it to a piece of children's learning. I like to think about them as incomes and talk to my colleagues about them as incomes, because then if I think about, a child having a strong sense of identity, what's all the incoming information that is indicating that child has a strong sense of identity, rather than they've put their bag in their locker, therefore they must have a strong sense of identity. I can't know that. But I can, as you have so beautifully demonstrated, when children are doing something and they're curious about it, if I think about that as incoming information, I can then go, that child has curiosity, so they must be a confident and involved learner. I can dance with what I'm seeing there in outcome 4. And that's where that incoming information, if I turn the outcomes into incomes, that's when I'll go, that's where that will find its little, place of belonging.
I really like that. That's good.
I have an Irish heritage, so at risk of stereotyping myself and every other Irish person, sometimes flipping things around the other way, going backwards, creates this opening for learning in a different kind of way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
More deliciousness. Val, is that outside, inside?
No, yeah, that is outside, inside.
I just can't get away from the outdoors.
I know, I'm sorry. Not sorry.
Divine. It's divine. I'm very inspired.
These are my little literacy setups. I always try and add a book to the little areas. The one on the left, we had such an interest in construction and demolition and roadwork, and so that was never ending, that one. And then and I think if you've got a book with them, it just sort of, they can look at it and then relate back and then retell the story in their own way, and I kind of like that idea.
I love the way that the first words out of your mouth to describe these images was how I do literacy.
Yes.
I can imagine that people might have gone, is this how Val sets things up? Or is this how this or that? And your description of them was, these are literacy spaces. And I adore that because, again, your favorite pages, 21 and 22, play and intentionality, is that the intentionality is that by ensconcing yourself and being in something and experiencing it, and then that is a form of literacy because you're doing all the pre-literacy work in that moment and embodying it. And then you've also then got the testament through the story that's there. And that's saying this could be one of the storylines that you're playing with in amongst this. And we can read the story, but we can also experience the story. We can tell the story. We can become the story and play the story out with our dramatic arts.
And add our new versions of the story. That's always the best.
Innovate on the text. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. I love that. I also love the way that there's such authenticity in the collections of things. So you've got some recycled materials or upcycled or cycled or refreshed, renewed. You've got bits and pieces from outside. You've got bits that you probably have collected or bought here and there. It's a really lovely, eclectic collection of things, and homemade, becoming on the way out. Like those ferns will probably return to dust. Let's jump to these. Talk us through a few of these. We're on the home stretch, but I'd love people to hear about these beautiful little captions, pedagogical captions, or captures of practice, or moments of thinking and deliciousness.
Why I did this, because, you say to the families when, oh, they had fun in the mud, but I wanted them to see what the children had learnt in the mud. And so I guess that's why down the bottom I just wrote, this is what they were learning, and this is how it, there were so many different learning outcomes, but you don't want to be too busy with them all. So I just chose the 2.4.1. I think that was on the old version, because that's back last year, that one. But and so that's the best way I felt that I could explain what the learning was happening there.
Short and sweet. So I think that, also too, there's so much in this, and I love that whenever the interest ends, or forever.
Yeah.
There's, you've got a few salient points there, and just enough, a little nod to what's going on, and this beautiful communication that, again, I think it's very inclusive, because that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, families, sometimes they'll read things, sometimes they won't, but there's enough there to prompt your memory. There's enough there to communicate with families. There's enough there to substantiate, yep, I'm engaging with the ALFs, and I know how it sits with the National Quality Standard, and this is how I'm presenting it in a small, achievable way, so we don't have to overload ourselves.
Oh, this was one of my most favourite projects ever. And it all started with a couple of little guys, and they had torches, because we love torches. Everyone loves torches, and the torches are just out for them. And they had put the torches into the Play-Doh, and they couldn't understand why they couldn't see the light through the Play-Doh. And then it went on, and then we just talked about, making some shadow puppets, and then we made some shadow puppets, and then we did our faces. And then I got to thinking, gosh, this is, the play with light. And then I thought, I wonder, can I get a projector? And then so my extension was that we got an overhead projector, and then that learning just went on for months and months and months, and it changed and evolved over time. And yeah, so that was so much fun.
And there's another piece here, and as I'm looking, I'm seeing quality areas, I'm seeing EYLF, I'm seeing photographs, I'm seing stories. So it's just
I try, and when I write, what the learning, like if you can go back one, I try and just sort of what I write, I try and link, like I write the outcome, but I try and write what that outcome means, so that it means something. It's in context, if that makes sense.
So it's like the example, it's a well thought out, what is that? And obviously you don't have that stored in your head. You'll go, well, hang on a minute.
Absolutely. And quite often you'll think, oh, that might be in learning outcome 4.2, and then you go, hang on, but that's more like 4.4, because you think you know where it is, and then you look and go, actually, no, it's not, but that's okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't, the lesson we're learning from you is, or the message is, that it is using the framework, is constantly using it, not having to memorize it and not having to get it right, because it might be this or it might be that, or it could be two things at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
And so now we've got a little video. Do you want to introduce it, Val?
Well, basically, this is, and I'm not saying this is how everybody should do it. I'm just saying this was what works for me. I like boxes. I like order. I have tried so many different ways of programming. And in the end, I just designed my own because it worked. And so this is basically how I keep track of everything, and it works for me. And so, yeah, it's just have a play and see what.
Let's hit play. This is Val's premiere pedagogical documentation movie, and you are here to witness it.
Okay, besides my project book and observations, this is how I record the children's learning as well. This is my diary. That's just where I record day-to-day things children have said, what observations I'm taking, what I need to do, what children I have. Then every afternoon I do up of what we did today. And this goes to all of my families each afternoon, which helps to keep them updated on what they're doing, and it keeps me reflecting on what learning's going on. Then I plan for follow-up from past observations and evaluate them. These are plans for intentional learning, things that I want to introduce and what I think we can work on, such as focus areas, their evaluations. That's the school children's learning interests and follow-up. And then at the end of the week, I do a big reflection.
So the other thing I love, Val, I'm just going to get our faces back. The other thing that I love, there's so many things that I just love when you're talking and what I'm hearing, because I'm, interpreting it through that EYLF framework, is that, when you look at your places and spaces, it looks like it's all out there and woo-woo. And then you say, actually, I love boxes, I love order, and I've tried this, and this, and this actually helps me do that. And I adore that you're going, we say, oh, chuck out the boxes and chuck out the templates. And in some cases, it is good to do that if they're constraining. They're actually helping you think through things, which we saw. And then you're creating all this open-ended stuff where it's investigating and exploring and discovery and investigation and all those beautiful, curious terms. So it's like that thing where there is no truth about you have to have this or you have to have that, or you should have this or you shouldn't have that. The thinking is the most important part to be able to then plan for thinking and then thinking through planning. And I think you've just illustrated that so beautifully. I am totally inspired by many things you've said. I feel very reassured. I'm a very experienced teacher and I love my job. I think I'm pretty good at it, but I also love these kinds of conversations. This is collaborative leadership between two educators. We've done a lot of critical reflection that we've demonstrated for our gorgeous colleagues out there. We've danced with different pages. We've wrestled with where's that one and what about this and what could we put here and how could we do that? And so hopefully you're as inspired by Val as I am. Val, I think you're just going to be getting a few emails and phone calls and text messages about how well, you'll definitely be getting some from me.
Of course.
But yeah, any kind of final thoughts you want to share with your colleagues?
Look, like I said before, it's just go with it, follow your nose, get stuck into it, just read little snippets, don't put too much pressure on yourself, and just know that you never know everything, and just keep learning, thinking about thinking and acting. That's all I can say.
Sage advice. So Val, we can't thank you enough. And yeah, I will actually, you're going to inspire me. I am going to go outside after.
Yay! You take off your shoes. Walk on the grass.
Take off my high heels. See what a good teacher you are, Val. You've actually got me outdoors. So I will do that. Actually, I will challenge myself. Thank you so much for all of the preparation, all of the thinking, all of the inspiration, and lucky children, lucky us to have you in our beautiful collaboration. And we'll look forward to hearing more from you sometime.
Thanks, Red. Thanks, everyone.